Hey guys, welcome back to the channel and to Coffee and Cartridges. Today we're going to talk about the top things you need to know when it comes to buying a new rifle. Stay tuned. Now if you've done the research and you've really thought it through, this video is probably not for you because you know what you want and you know why you want it. But of course, sometimes we just buy a gun on impulse, or maybe we casually make the purchase because it's a certain caliber or a certain cartridge, and maybe there's some things that we should have thought about before we did, and in retrospective, we regret it. So here are some of those things now. All right, first off, barrel length. Sometimes we decide we want a 30-06, or we decide we want a 7mm PRC. Or 7mm rim mag. We decided on the cartridge, then we go looking for the particular gun, and as soon as we find the first one that's in that cartridge, we buy it thinking, I've got what I want. I wanted this particular cartridge, I found a rifle in that cartridge, done. But as you look at the length of the barrel, and the length of the barrel could determine whether you're going to get what you actually wanted to get in the first place. So every cartridge is a little different. Every cartridge holds different amounts of powder. And depending on the amount of powder it holds and the type of powder generally used, you may or may not need a shorter or longer barrel. Generally speaking, the more powder that can be held within that cartridge, the longer barrel you're going to need to burn all that powder. Once again, it's powder specific, but generally speaking, that is the case. So for instance, a .22 long rifle has very little powder. It doesn't need a lot of barrel length to burn up that powder. And in fact, could easily have too much barrel length. Or maybe you're buying something like a 300 Weatherby Magnum and you don't think about it at the time until you get home with the purchased rifle, but it has a very short, say 22-inch barrel. And you realize later that that's really not enough barrel to get the performance that you were looking for in the cartridge that you decided on. Generally speaking, you've probably heard this before, that the longer the barrel, the higher the velocity. And that is typically true, because the longer the forces that are behind that bullet created by the explosion and combustion of the powder and the pressure that caused, the longer of time that the forces inside that barrel have time to act upon the bullet and push it, the faster it's going to go when it eventually exits the muzzle. But there is a limit to this. So a bullet going down a barrel is literally being corkscrewed by the rifling. The bullet technically is about the size of the grooves of the rifling, not the lands. Therefore, the lands are engraving that bullet as it goes down. It's quite a bit of friction. This is something you could never do with just taking a stick or your finger or trying to push a bullet down a rifle bore. You couldn't do it. It takes a lot of force. So the longer this bullet goes down that barrel, the higher the velocity to a point, because there's going to come a point where as your volume increases, your pressure has been decreasing, and then eventually the friction caused by that bullet being literally pushed and spun down that barrel is going to be a little bit greater than the force acting upon it from the pressure that it caused by firing it. And at that point, it'll actually slow down a little bit. So say a .243 with like a 45-inch barrel is going to go slower than a .243 with, say, a 26-inch barrel. Because with that particular amount of powder, it's going to reach that point where it's still going to come out, obviously. It's got pressure behind it, force is pushing it out, but it's going to slow down because of that friction that's slowing it down. So there is a point where a barrel's length becomes too much. Now, in most centerfire standard, factory rifles, you're never gonna achieve this. That you would have to be way longer than what you're gonna find on a shelf. However, with a .22 long rifle, it is potentially there, the option is there that, you get a 24-inch 22 long rifle. You don't need that long of a barrel. Really, anything beyond 16 to 18 inches is probably too much barrel. And therefore, it's probably going to actually slow your bullet down a little bit. Now, a 24-inch barrel versus a 14-inch barrel on a 22 would be quieter because the muzzle's further away from you. But as far as velocity, you're actually not gaining anything by having that long barrel. But with a 300 Weatherby Magnum, you definitely don't want a short barrel. You want a longer barrel to have time to burn up that powder. And so with a 20-inch barrel out of a 300 Weatherby Magnum, there's a lot of untapped potential that you're going to be wasting by having that short barrel. Now, this is a subjective thing, of course. You might go with a powerful centerfire cartridge, but you do want a relatively short barrel for a number of reasons. Maybe you're willing to give up some speed because you want it to be more portable and lighter weight, or you might be willing to give up a little speed knowing that you're going to put like a 6-inch suppressor on the end of it, and you don't want an extremely long barrel for that purposes as well. So it is subjective, but just be aware before you purchase the gun, what barrel length are you looking to get? Typically speaking, Magnums are usually 26 inches, with sometimes exceptions being 24 inches. Something like a 6.5 Creedmoor case or a 308 case generally are going to be 22. Unless it's a gun developed for competition, then it might be longer. And then generally your standard length cartridges like a 30-06 are going to be in 24 inches, but sometimes less. And so maybe you don't want a 22-inch 30-06 barrel. Maybe you want a 24-inch, so that's something to look out for. All right, next is twist rate. Something a lot of people, especially casual gun buyers, don't think about, possibly don't even know about, is the twist rate of the barrel. And a lot of times, especially in the past, gun manufacturers didn't really advertise it. You had to really dig deep into their literature to figure out what the twist rate was. Today it is more prevalent. Gun makers do kind of use it to advertise because we're kind of moving toward heavier bullets, which requires a faster twist rate. So it is more prevalent today to know the twist rate, but sometimes you don't, but that could be something that you're not aware about. Now, if you're new to rifles, here's the basic layout. The faster the twist rate, the heavier bullets it can shoot. But the number will be smaller the faster it is. So a 1 in 7 twist rate is much faster than a 1 in 12 twist rate, because it means that the bullet will spin around completely 360 degrees one time in 7 inches or in 12 inches. And so if it only takes 7 inches to spin that bullet around one time, one revolution, then it's a faster twist rate. So the number will always be 1 in X amount of inches. And the smaller that number is, the faster the twist rate. So heavier bullets have to be longer, right? If you add weight to a bullet, you have to either change the alloy or the metal, because different alloys and metals have different density and volume and all that, or you just simply make it longer. You can't change the width of the bullet because that's its caliber. So a 30 caliber bullet cannot get bigger or smaller than 30 caliber. It'll just become longer or shorter based on weight. And the longer the bullet is, the faster it needs to twist in order to stabilize it in the air. It's not just the weight, it's also the shape of the bullet and its aerodynamics. However, a good way to think about it is heavier bullet needs a faster twist rate. Now, in a similar fashion, as there's friction as a bullet goes down the rifling of the barrel, it takes a tremendous amount of force to push it through the rifling. The faster the twist rate, the more force it takes. So a 1 in 7 inch twist rate is going to have that bullet going much faster and more revolutions as it goes down the barrel. What I did right there was an exaggeration, but that's just to explain that maybe a 1 in 14 is more like this. It just has less spirals, less revolutions. So the faster the twist rate, the more friction and the more time with that friction upon your bullet, which technically will slow it down a little bit. So let's look at a .308. Now, 30 caliber bullets by our manufacturers today generally range from like 110 to 220 grains on that caliber. Now it's actually going beyond that with things like the 300 PRC, which can shoot even heavier bullets because it has a 1 in 8 twist. But in a .308, it has a 1 in 10 twist. So it's going to be able to stabilize up to around a 220 grain semi-round nose bullet. You know, you get the most aerodynamic, very low drag bullet, you might need to bring it down to 200, 210 because of that shape. But typically with the .308, because it's a short action and the case is short, you know, a 210 grain VLD bullet is so long, it's going to take up a lot of case capacity. So really, unless you're shooting F-class, 180 grains is probably going to be as heavy and as long of a bullet as you pick for a .308. And you're probably not going to go down to 110, though you could. Your range is probably more like 130 to 180 grains. Like I said, most .308s come in a 1 in 10 twist. However, some come in a 1 in 11 or a 1 in 12. But let's just say that you know you're going to shoot between 130 and 150 grain bullet, and you know you don't need that fast twist rate. You actually might want the 1 in 12 because that's less force asserted on the bullet to cause it to have to spin more. And therefore, you're going to eke out a little bit more velocity in a 1 in 12 slower twist rate than a 1 in 10. Now, we're not talking much. We're really not. But it is a little bit, maybe 10 to 20 feet per second. But on the other hand, maybe you're wanting to get a rifle for varmints and you want to shoot a 22 caliber bullet, but you kind of want to go heavy. And so you are looking for, you know, a 75 to 85 grain bullet in a 22 caliber. If you just go buy a 22 250 off the shelf, it's more than likely going to have like a 1 in 12 twist rate, maybe even 1 in 14, and it's really going to top out around 55 to 60 grains, maybe a little more. And you're not going to be able to shoot those heavy bullets. Maybe you need an AR in .223 with a 1 in 7 or 1 in 9 twist rate. So it's really important. Are you looking to shoot the heaviest bullets per caliber? Are you wanting to be as versatile as possible? Or do you know you're going to be shooting lighter bullets and you want a slower twist rate? So very important to know the twist rate. All right, once again, in no particular order, availability. You need to know how available your cartridge and rifle will be when it comes to ammunition. You know, you might see a really cool 6.5 284 or a 35 Whelen or something that's not super common, and you think it's really cool, which I would agree with you, but you can't go to Walmart, and probably not even a Bass Pro, and find that ammunition. In fact, it's going to be very difficult. It might be difficult online to find that ammunition, or if you can find it, it might be very expensive because it's not common. There's a low demand, therefore there's a low supply, therefore it's not worth the manufacturer's time. So when they do make it, they're going to charge you for it. Or maybe you're on a hunting trip, you either forgot your ammo or it got lost in transit, and you need some backup ammo, and you go to the store in whatever country or state or whatever to find more ammo, and you can't find it because it's so uncommon. So now that might not mean anything to you. You might prefer to have a niche cartridge. I'm kind of like that. And I'm going to hand load for it. And so I'm not as concerned with availability. But you really need to understand, is this an available common cartridge so that I can find bullets to shoot out of it? Now, something else is the sights. Now, most people in our modern day are probably going to put a scope on the gun. But there are times where you might think, especially if you order the gun and you don't buy it in person, that it has iron sights on it or some kind of sight on it. And you may or may not want a scope eventually, but you know as soon as you get the gun, you can use it with its iron sights. And you decide that the place where I hunt is in thick woods and I don't need a scope anyway. And then you get the gun and it doesn't even have iron sights because the manufacturer's assuming you're going to put a scope on it. So it has a rail, or at least it has a place to mount a rail, but it doesn't have any place to mount sights on the barrel, and therefore it's unusable until you get a scope, or you take it to a gunsmith to have him mount those screw holes to put the sights on. So just be aware before you order a gun online that you know whether it comes with sights and or a place for a scope or one or the other. Next would be the quality of this rifle. You need to do some research and figure out what people are saying about the trigger, about the stock, about the smoothness of the action, because that's something you want to fully understand before you actually take it home and have already made the purchase. In most places, you cannot return a firearm, and so you're kind of stuck with it unless you can sell it to somebody privately. Perhaps a very smooth action means a lot to you, and you just assume all actions are smooth, and then you buy that one that's the cheapest one you found, and it's very grindy, and it's like sandpaper, and you absolutely hate it because it's not smooth. It doesn't feed well. That's something you need to know before you buy it. Or maybe you like a hair trigger, and the trigger has a horrible, 7 or 8 pounds on the pull, and you just can't get used to it. And there's no way to adjust it without buying a whole new trigger. Or maybe you just assume that synthetic stock was like every other synthetic stock and it was good quality, but maybe it's hollow inside. Maybe it has a lot of give to it. Maybe it touches the barrel in weird places at different times and it's causing a big accuracy issue. And now you have to replace your stock. Or now you have to make several upgrades to your rifle to get it to where you actually wanted it to be, and it becomes a big hassle. And you wish you would have realized these things before you bought it, and you would have just spent the extra money to get the rifle that you actually wanted from the beginning. So you definitely need to just check into that stuff. Hear feedback. What are people saying about the stock, the trigger? Is it stuff you're going to have to replace? Next is barrel life. Now, barrel life could be something that's very important to you, or it might not be. If you're strictly a hunter and every bullet could result in an elk to feed your family through an entire winter, then it probably doesn't matter to you. Say it's a 28 Nosler with a very short barrel life, it doesn't mean anything. But maybe you're investing a lot of money in this rifle. You're spending a good chunk of change, $1,000 or more, and you want it to be an heirloom piece, and you want it to be something you can pass down to your children and hopefully their children's children. And so you want it to last a long time. So maybe you want something like a 308 that's going to have 5,000 to 10,000 rounds of barrel life. So obviously if you're shooting in competition, you're going to be changing out barrels every season, if not more. If you're a hunter, it's going to be way less because you're just literally shooting it to develop a load, practice with it, and then eventually take your game, and then you're not going to shoot it again until the next season. But once again, are you good with it only lasting for 10 years? Or do you want to take it to the range a lot and want to hand it down to your kids and you want it to last many generations? So if barrel life is a question, you just need to think about, is it overbore? Now, overbore can be a subjective way of looking at something. Everyone could define a cartridge or rifle being overbore in a different way. I think we can all agree that a straight-walled cartridge is not overbore, but a cartridge with a shoulder that's neck down is going to be more overbore than a straight-walled cartridge. And then depending on how much powder capacity it has and how small of a caliber it's neck down to, it's going to become more overbore. So anyone could tell you a 30 378 Weatherby is overbore, a 28 Nosler is overbore. And you can go to the extreme. You can get a 300 Winchester Magnum with a Sabo 22. That's extremely overbore. There is overbore cartridges, and they do exist, but how concerned about it are you? A 270 is a neck down 30-06. Therefore, if it's neck down with the same amount of powder, it's going to be more overbore than a 30-06. It's going to be more overbore than its wider caliber parent. Now, a 270 is not extremely overbore, but it is more overbore than a 30-06. And therefore, a 25-06 is going to be more overbore than a 270. Look at the 308. You neck that thing down to 243. The 243 is definitely going to be more overbore than the 308. Because you generally have the same powder capacity in the case. Generally speaking, you're going to have the same barrel length. However, the diameter of that barrel is much smaller. Therefore, you have much less volume in that barrel. So the same amount of powder is going through the same length barrel, but in a much tighter, smaller hole, causing a lot more pressure, a lot more heat, and decreasing the life of the barrel because of it being overbore. And I'll leave you with this today. Also, the materials in which the rifle is built. Now, if you are buying this rifle to hunt with it very seldomly or shoot very seldomly, and you want it to be a showpiece, maybe you want a traditionally blued steel, and maybe you want a beautiful high-grade walnut stock. But are you going to have this in a tree stand? Are you going to be throwing it in and out of a truck? Are you going to be scraping it up against this and bumping it up against that? If that's the case, maybe you want a good synthetic stock and potentially a stainless steel barrel. Or maybe you want it to be Duracoated. You might be a person who loves to take care of a rifle, and every time you touch it, you're going to wipe it down, you're going to oil it, you're going to take care of it, and you're just more concerned with the looks of it. But maybe you're more concerned with it being rugged and just lasting a long time. And if it gets a scratch, it gets a scratch. If you forget to clean it for a few days, it's not going to rust as easy. So just the materials that the rifle is built from is definitely important. And the very last thing I'll say is you can't focus on brand only. There was a time where if it was a Remington or a Winchester, you knew it was top quality. There was a time where Savage was top quality, and then it got pretty low. Now it's pretty good again. But they have, different ranges, of course. They have the Axis is not as good of quality as their higher end rifles. But in today's time, maybe there's a new rifle that's a Bergara or a CVA, and you don't know anything about it, but it's good quality. And maybe the Remington 700, the synthetic version is not what it used to be. So don't just go by brand. Really look at reviews, really look at what those companies have done recently. Just because it's a Browning or a Sako doesn't mean it's automatically good quality. Now, I would say in 2023, those companies do have really good quality. But there's a big difference between the AB3 and your X-Bolt Pro, okay? So don't just look at the brand and say, it's good because that used to be the case. It's not 100% consistent today. So really do your research into the model of the firearm. Okay, that's just some recommendations I have. That's some things I think about when I'm buying a gun. I'm sure there's many more I've forgotten or that you focus more on. I'd love to hear in the comments the things that you care more about when it comes to buying a new rifle. If you've liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed, please consider subscribing. Many more videos like this coming out. And check the description in the link below. There's several links, I should say, of some really cool stuff. And anyway, we're just going to stop there today. Thank you for drinking coffee with me and talking about rifles and cartridges. And hopefully you have a great day. And until next time, take care.